to the What Really Happened radio show. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Tuesday, March 29th, 2016, almost getting into April there. You wouldn't know it from much of the continental United States, which is getting snow. That white fluffy stuff that Al Gore told you was a thing of the past. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. Tom is sitting in our control room waiting to answer the phone, put you on the air. We got lots and lots of stuff to talk about, and predictably somebody is trying to hack my server just as I go on the air. So let's see. There we go. All right, going to stick the automated system on. All right, well, earlier today there was an incident that everybody thought, oh, it's another terror attack. We had this hijacker grabbed an Egypt Air aircraft and flew it to Cyprus, claiming he had a suicide belt. Turned out he did not. And it turned out it wasn't an act of terror. This guy just wanted to get to Cyprus to talk to his ex-wife. They're describing him as mentally unstable, and they're saying, no, this was most assuredly not an act of terror. This was just this guy just decided he wanted to talk to his ex-wife, and he's in custody, and everybody is safe on that one. Okay, now getting on to the campaign and the candidates here, there is still this big, huge push for a brokered convention, at which point Donald Trump would be kicked out and they're going to force some other candidate on us of their own choosing. Maybe, maybe not. Now, on April 5th, we've got the next GOP primary, and we're going to actually see exactly what, if any, effect Ted Cruz's sex scandal is having on his numbers, and whether it's going to gain any traction or not. Because if Ted Cruz starts losing states that he was projected to win, then Trump is going to get his first ballot victory, and there's not much of anything the GOP leadership can do to stop him, absent shooting him off the platform like they did Robert Kennedy. But we're looking at this article over here in Investment Watch blog. Collision Course, latest delegate count shows Trump-Clinton destined for a duel. Now, there's another article over here in RINF.com saying Clinton won't automatically become president after the nomination. You've been seeing all this stuff in the media about, oh, absolutely, Hillary can beat Donald Trump. No problem. She would have trouble against Marco Rubio or Ted Cruz, but no way could Donald Trump. And, of course, as I mentioned before, Hillary Clinton is playing Richard Nixon's strategy from his re-election campaign, which was to sabotage the candidates that she knows she can't beat and toss the nomination to somebody she can roll right over, which was going to be Ted Cruz, especially with his vulnerability on his natural-born status in the Constitution. But actually looking at what's going on here, it is far from certain that if this comes down to a Trump-Hillary contest, that Hillary is a guaranteed winner, especially as her support continues to soften. The scandals continue to dog at her heels. She's going to be interviewed by the FBI. And at this particular point, with the sentiment in the American people, if she's indicted, everybody's going to cheer. If she isn't indicted, everybody's going to scream, it's a cover-up. It's a no-win situation for Hillary at this point. Now, Bernie Sanders has challenged Hillary Clinton to a new debate. And Hillary Clinton has come back and saying, well, I'll debate you if you change your tone. In other words, the only way that Hillary will have another debate with Bernie Sanders is if he mellows on down and lets her roll all over him, and Bernie Sanders isn't going to do that. Now, Hillary is out there saying that Bernie Sanders is too sexist and he's too aggressive. You're campaigning for president. Of course you're going to be aggressive. But if she can't deal with Bernie Sanders being an aggressive debater, how is she possibly going to go up against Donald Trump? It's amazing. Now, there's a very interesting article. This is actually in the Huffington Post. It is time for Hillary Clinton to concede the Democratic nomination to Bernie Sanders. And they're already saying, without those superdelegates, which were arm-twisted into supporting Hillary, it's now a horse race, and Sanders is gaining. Now, the latest poll that we have here shows Donald Trump at nearly 50% support among Republicans nationally. The others are split between Cruz and Kasich. And remember, George Soros just gave Kasich $700,000 not to drop out of the race in order to force a brokered convention. Because if Kasich drops out, most of his supporters are probably going to slide over to the Trump camp. And for a very good reason. So far, Trump is the only candidate unafraid to call out Clinton for her crimes. The other candidates are soft-pedaling, including Bernie Sanders. Remember the first debate, and Sanders said, I'm sick and tired of hearing about the email scandal. And he was trying to be a gentleman and play the high ground, or maybe at that point he was still thinking he could be Hillary Clinton's vice president. But the more I think about it, the more I think that that kind of an attitude, I don't want to hear about the email scandal by Bernie Sanders, that makes for a very poor president, because if there's one thing you should have in a president who's serving the nation and its people is a willingness to look at the dirt inside the government. Now, apparently, there's a new amateur rap video out, a bunch of thugs carrying shovels and clubs, basically rapping about shooting Donald Trump, and I hope the Secret Service pays him a little bit of a visit here. Now, apparently, the Soros agitators have succeeded in angering a large amount of the American population, and there's now literally a biker group. And I don't mean the little pedal kind. I'm talking about choppers. You know, black leather colors. And they're riding to Wisconsin, where they're basically going to stand between the Soros-paid agitators and the Trump supporters. Now, speaking of the agitators, apparently over at the Janesville Holiday Inn, there were a bunch of these anti-Trump disruptors, and they basically took over the Holiday Inn. Disorderly conduct, obstructing, all kinds of things. They were given several opportunities to leave the building peacefully, but they refused, and they were finally arrested. And I'm sure they were all out there screaming, hey, we're making $16 an hour being here. You know, please leave us alone. I need the money. Now, following his recent string of victories, Bernie Sanders has now opened his Maryland campaign headquarters. And it's absolutely true. His recent string of victories have energized his campaign. Hillary is seen as weakening, and Bernie Sanders is strengthening. Now, getting on over to Ted Cruz, he's still out there screaming, oh, the National Enquirer, it's all a bunch of nonsense. And again, I want to remind you, yes, the National Enquirer, when it first started, had a reputation for, you know, the Incredible Frog Boy and all this other nonsensical story. But in 1988, they got sued by Cher, the singer, Sonny and Cher, and then she went on to a spectacular career of her own. It's a very nice lady. And she sued them over a story that said that she had yelled at somebody at the Academy Awards. And she was given $15 million. And that forced the Enquirer to change its editorial policy. And yes, the National Enquirer likes to dig in the dirty laundry. That's their business. That's their market niche. But they do fact-check a lot more carefully. And they have been right about Edwards, Tiger Wood, all these people. They keep hitting it. And everyone will deny and say, oh, it's the National Enquirer, and then it comes out, it's really true. So, here's where we're going on here. There was this TV interview. Conservative reporter David Martosco asked Ted Cruz directly if he'd ever been unfaithful to his wife, Heidi Cruz. The answer you would expect would be, no, I never have. And Ted Cruz dodged the question, danced around it, got angry, how dare you? Which means, yes, he has, and he knows somebody out there can prove it, and he doesn't want to commit to that statement. So, we'll be right back. Hello, America. Welcome back to the show, and I'm sure I'm sounding a lot better to you. We had a glitch with our Skype system, and it switched to the wrong audio input, but we're all fixed and good to go now. Let's go ahead and grab ourselves some phone calls from these very patient callers waiting online. Dustin in New Jersey, aloha. What's on your mind today?
Yeah, hi, Mike. Yeah, it sounded like you're talking through a can with a string.
Well, you know, the state of modern software and hardware, it's all glitchy, and nobody wants to fix it because the big money is in selling or renting you something newer, but I've had this problem before. It just takes a momentary interruption, and Skype just goes back to the default built-in microphone on the laptop that I have running it. Anyway, it's all fixed. We're all better now.
Hey, Mike, on that video Mark Dice put on that they want to have a chopper in the trunk for Trump, that's like a means to have an AK-47 to kill him. Where's John McCain? Is he going to arm these young folks?
I don't know, but it is very alarming to me that we see all these people either directly talking about assassinating Trump. There's that tombstone they put up in Central Park. Other people are using assassination metaphors so they can say bullet in the head and say, well, I meant financially. But, I mean, they're just telegraphing it out there that they want somebody to kill this guy.
And you know what? I don't hear anything. If this was a bunch of white guys saying they got a rifle in the trunk for Obama, you would be on every station around the world, and it's not part of their agenda. You know, it fits into their agenda, so that's why there's nothing about it on the news. There won't be anything about it on the news. Trump's got to be careful now because he not only could have operatives in his campaign to ruin him at the proper time, but you got all these people going around now that if Trump does win, Mike, we could be looking at a civil war. People would be so angry. They're being brought up to be angry, you know, by Hillary Clinton and George Soros. But can you imagine what's going to happen when Trump wins?
You know, if Trump is kicked out at the convention or if he's assassinated, that could trigger a civil war. You know, we're really in a no-win situation here if these money junkies and these power freaks don't back down.
It's sad how these Clinton, Soros, the Republican Party, and Democrat have really created an atmosphere of terror around the world and here.
Well, they've created terror around the world. Here in the United States, they've created anger. And they've spent a lot of time doing it here. Both on the Republican and Democratic side, people are furious at the arrogance of the party leadership. I saw an article a little while ago about how the Republican base is out of control. And it comes from the position that ordinary Republicans should just follow what the party leadership tells you to do. Well, that's right out of the old Soviet Union. They've got it exactly backwards. The GOP party is supposed to follow the will of the GOP voters, not the other way around. And this is building up to a head somewhere. Anyway, listen, we got a lot of callers. Thank you for the call, Dustin. Going to let you go and switch over to Reed in New Jersey. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, one quick question. If we do get into a situation with the Electoral College with Hillary Clinton, the key swing states like Pennsylvania, Ohio, Virginia, and Florida could be won by Trump. So it seems like what they need to do now is essentially just job him out of the election fairly or unfairly. And I'll hang up, and that's my one question. Thank you, and goodbye.
Okay, well, you know, I'm not sure how much the Electoral College has to do with it. It's an obsolete institution, and it's another layer of obfuscation in the process. There have been instances in the past where the electors sent to the electoral colleges by the states decide to vote for the other guy. And that, too, I think would trigger a violent uprising here because all along the way, whether it's electoral college or party leadership or superdelegates or all of this stuff, we are getting the message continually, we are not allowed to choose our own leaders anymore. It's violation of the basic contract of the United States of America. We choose our leaders, we give them our consent to govern, and then they run the country for us. But if we're not picking our own leaders, then our leaders do not have the consent of the governed, because the elections are a complete and total sham. Anyway, let's grab Arash up in Canada. Aloha, what's on your mind?
How you doing, Mike? I just want to remind everyone that Ted Cruz's wife was a former member of the CFR, and the CFR, along with the Trilateral Commission, invariably holds some of the highest offices in the land, sometimes perpetually. And just want to remind people of the fact that, like, besides the fact that Ted Cruz can't run based on the Constitution, just to remind everyone that his wife is complete establishment and, like, a lot of...
She's another potential Hillary.
Absolutely, and, like, a lot of the world's problems stem from those two organizations, and I was wondering what your thoughts on that.
Well, you know, there a lot of people are digging out the background on Heidi, and you need to be very, very careful about what's going on, because the Cruz campaign is trying to flood the discussion with all kinds of bogus information in an effort to trip up people. It's a tactic called poisoning the well. Somebody has a bunch of very damaging information about you. You plant one piece of information in there that you can then come back and say, well, this is all false, and therefore probably all of it's false. And it's an old propaganda technique. And they're trying to build to that. We were talking yesterday where somebody came up with a photoshopped, altered National Enquirer front page to try and plant a story to be discredited down the road to damage the Enquirer and the independent media. And the Enquirer came out and said, this isn't us. This is somebody else who did this. So they're playing dirty, but they're using tactics that we're all familiar with. And it's one thing about propaganda. When people understand they're being propagandized, when they understand the basic tactics of propaganda, it just simply does not work any longer.
It's ineffective.
Yeah.
And if there's any semblance of saving the U.S., the first and top thing that you have to do is get rid of the Federal Reserve and write off all the debt as odious debt and revert back to a currency.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We have to get rid of all the private central banks.
Oil, even timber, anything to have some sort of value.
You could use electricity. I mean, when Germany kicked out the private central bank imposed on them by the Treaty of Versailles, they issued a currency that was based as a unit of labor. And it worked. It led to the German miracle. But yeah, I agree. All the world's private central banks must be shut down. They have been making themselves rich on the labor of humanity for 300 years. That's long enough. It's time to go back to an economic system that serves the nation and its people. And we have to get rid of all of them at the same time. Because every time one country kicks out a private central bank, may I finish? Every time one country kicks out a private central bank, all the other nations enslaved to private central banks declare war on them to force them back in. That's what happened in Libya with Gaddafi. He kicked out the private central bank. He set up a state central bank and a value-based currency, and everybody piled on, and now Libya's back under private central banking. That's what's driving all the war agenda.
Right, because everything else is secondary, tertiary. The first thing you got to get rid of is the private central bank.
Absolutely. We got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the phone call. We'll be back after these few words with more of our callers. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to take a phone call here. Steve in Massachusetts. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I want to talk about the Muslims and how the migrants were led into Europe and America as well, and all of a sudden there's a series of attacks blamed on the Muslims. It just seems too convenient. I know this is pre-planned, but how far back do you think it was pre-planned?
Well, we have to stop looking at all of these plans as a singular, because what we're seeing are different factions, different groups, and each have their own agenda. And we have, on one hand, the New World Order people who thought they could just sort of flood the United States with illegal immigrants and refugees, and Europe with Muslim refugees, and we'd all hold hands and sing Kumbaya around the campfire. And that's not working out very well. Then there's a very clear indication that there's another group with an agenda of trying to start literally a holy war, if you will, a crusade between the Christians and the Muslims, and we all know who's going to benefit from that. And so these various agendas are clearly colliding and working at cross purposes, and that's why some of the statements and propaganda coming out tends to be absurd. But again, the issue is we're not out here saying that all Muslims are terrorists. A very, very microscopic percentage of people are terrorists. We're being told that they're Muslim. We don't know that that's guaranteed. There's been so much fakery with all these ISIS videos and everything. But again, we should avoid generalization of guilt on anything. And we shouldn't hold, for example, we don't hold all of the people of Israel collectively guilty for the crimes of Israel's government. We don't hold the American people collectively guilty for the crimes of Washington, D.C. and the CIA and the NSA and so forth. And we should not hold all the world's Muslim people collectively guilty for the crimes of ISIS and Al-Qaeda, whoever they finally turn out to be. So, but there are people out there who see chaos and conflict as conducive to whatever their agenda happens to be, whether it's selling more weapons or grabbing more territory or making sure that natural resources are sold only for the U.S. dollar. There is no grand overall master plan and strategy in play here, or things would be a lot calmer. What we're seeing are several different competing agendas vying for supremacy, and it's dragging the world toward a new global war.
Okay, now, I got a crazy question. You think anything correlates to what Albert Pike said about the third war with Christians versus the Muslims? You think they're going by his playbook?
Well, somebody is. Somebody is. That's where,
like
yeah. Somebody, and let's be honest, let's not pull any punches. Israel would absolutely love it if all the world's Christians and Muslims killed each other off, except for a small little group who would continue to live and pay retail.
Well, if you notice, all the attacks that are happening, all the atrocities by Israel is now forgotten. Nobody speaks about that anymore.
Well, we do. We've got a couple of stories on the front page of WhatReallyHappened.com. And you're absolutely right. A lot of people have noticed the timing, that every time Israel has been caught out with another war crime or they're about to invade somebody like Lebanon, there's a terror attack to distract the world's media.
Yeah, it just seems too obvious.
Well,
really
it isn't obvious if you don't understand that's how these games are being played. But once you understand that false flags are a common feature of foreign policy, then you begin to understand that cause and effect.
Yeah, you're right. Ever since I was awakened, everything that happens now, I question. I was like, well, is this a false flag? Every time something happens, do you have to question it now?
Well, I've come to the conclusion that probably 90% of all terror attacks are somebody's false flag. And the analogy I like to use goes back to colonial America. Because if you're trying to bring about change in your society, you need the support of the general public. You're not going to do anything to harm that. I mean, if George Washington and Thomas Jefferson had started going into colonial schools and killing school children, how much support do you think they would have had for the American Revolution? Absolutely none. So when you have this group out here which says, we're trying to bring about democratic change in our country, and all of a sudden there's an explosion that's blamed on them, it makes sense. The explosion is a false flag to destroy public support for a group that poses a threat of change to the ruling parties.
Yeah, I think they go into the well too many times that it could have
They have.
them in a butt.
They have. This was all supposed to be done and wrapped up back in 2008, according to General Wesley Clark. So the agenda is definite. All of these agendas are in trouble. The agenda to blend us all together and sing Kumbaya and have a global government is a complete and utter failure, and because it was based on the liberal philosophical underpinnings that we are all born with empty brains, and who we are as people is controlled entirely by the environment, and that if you just control the environment enough, you will control the minds of the people. And all of that goes back to Margaret Mead's book, Coming of Age in Samoa, which was a hoax. It was a complete botch-up. And so the philosophical, psychological underpinnings of liberalism are a complete fraud. And that's why liberals make so many mistakes.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, well, thank you, Michael.
All right, thank you. We're going to let you go. Now, getting back to the campaign trail, Carly Fiorina has actually come on out and said Ted Cruz will say whatever he needs to say to get elected, then he'll do what he pleases. And I think that's probably true for almost all the politicians out there. They're going to say whatever it takes to get elected, except, of course, we have Donald Trump, who's been saying what he's saying today for the last 30 years consistently. And remember, Donald Trump comes out of the world of business, where your word is your bond. And if you do not keep your promises, you're not in business any longer. And that stands in stark contrast with all these professional paid politicians who lie about everything from the moment they wake up to the moment they go to bed. They don't even dare tell the truth once out of fear we might learn how to tell the difference. So they'll lie about nonsensical things. Remember when Bill Clinton was telling us all he'd given up junk food and then we caught him coming out of a McDonald's on the other side of Oahu here? They lie about everything, so they present a consistent persona to you. You can't find the tells that they're lying because they're always lying and the tells are always there. You can't pick them up. They're never going to tell you the truth because you might actually learn how to tell the difference. Now, John Kerry is out there basically saying that the U.S. presidential race is becoming an embarrassment. And he's absolutely right. And he's saying that this ridiculous election season is harming the U.S. reputation internationally. And it is, because the U.S. reputation is supposed to be one of democracy, of the people choosing their own rulers, and we're being exposed to the entire world as just another dictatorship with party apparatchiks choosing the government for themselves. Now, down in Arizona, there's a big stink going on about the primary down there. As this Arizona representative is on the warpath, and he's part of these hearings that have just started up. Lines were so long, people spent 4 to 5 hours more just waiting to cast their votes. The number of polling locations were more than cut in half from 2012. There were relatively no polling places in any densely populated Latino communities. Democrats were mistakenly registered as independents. Anonymous says that was a computer hack that went into the database and changed them from Democrats to independents so their votes wouldn't be counted. And it happened to the Bernie Sanders supporters, not to the Hillary supporters. There were strange and weird evacuations during peak voting hours. Remember when they were doing that up in the Scottish referendum for independence? There was a fire alarm and everybody left. And when they came on back, all of a sudden the stacks of ballots had been moved around and so forth. And, of course, the media was calling Hillary the winner while voters were still voting, and that is a violation of the rules. They're not supposed to do that. And the list goes on. More about vote fraud when we come back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're talking about the debacle down in Arizona. And election fraud is like propaganda. It only works when the vast majority of people are unaware that it's going on. And this election season, the American people are getting a wake-up call that election fraud is not something that happens occasionally. It is the standard operating procedure. And they're going back and they're looking at the Collier Brothers book, Vote Scam. They're going back to that HBO documentary, Hacking Democracy, and they're realizing this is going on all around them. The elections are just a theater piece to make you think that you still have some say in the running of this country, even as the leadership of the party is telling you, no, you don't. Just sit down, give us your money, vote the person we tell you to vote. Stop complaining. You live on the greatest nation on earth. Well, down in Arizona, they're having hearings into election fraud. And Helen Purcell, who's on the hot seat for the way this was run, is saying, I want to apologize for what happened on March 27th, and the crowd is just booing. The crowd is very angry. As of last report, they have now moved the hearing behind closed doors because the people who came into the hearings and wanted to testify are just clearly very angry, and I imagine that the members of the legislature are actually worried about keeping their hides in place. And there's a lot of anger going on down there. There is a petition drive underway in Arizona to re-hold the Democratic primary on June 7th. Now, you know what's going to happen. Hillary Clinton, who champions the right for non-citizens to vote, she's going to fight this one tooth and nail. She's going to be sitting there saying, look, I stole Arizona fair and square. You're not allowed to take that away from me, by golly. Another article coming out of the Huffington Post. It's not just Arizona. Election shenanigans have defined the Democratic primaries and benefit Hillary Clinton. And they're going down all the cases of all the fraud and rigging that was going on. And they're saying the Democratic Party leadership, they're using the same excuses they've used in the past. Oh, the system was too complex. The volunteers weren't trained enough, and so forth and so on. And it's all a bunch of lies. Remember, here in Hawaii last Saturday, a Hillary supporter who was working for the polling place was caught stealing a stack of Sanders ballots and trying to throw them in the trash can. And the Huffington Post is going on to say, how did Clinton barely win the Iowa caucuses after getting crushed in other Midwest caucus states? And they're saying maybe because our election process is completely broken and untrustworthy. That's certainly true. And Hillary did it back in 2008. She was trailing Barack Obama, and they went into New Hampshire, and everybody said if Hillary loses New Hampshire, her campaign is over. And the polls in New Hampshire showed Obama ahead. The exit polls showed Obama winning, and then suddenly in the middle of the night, there was a magical, amazing come-from-behind victory for Hillary Clinton. Now, when the official results don't match the exit polls, that's treated as a sign that the election is fraudulent in any other country on planet Earth. When the official results don't match the exit polls here in the United States of America, we can count on the establishment media to say, oh, well, the voters were lying to the exit pollers, which is nonsense. You don't know who that exit poller is. You don't care what they think about you. It's nonsense. And every time election fraud is caught, we can also count on the establishment media to say, all right, well, there was a little fraud, but it didn't change the outcome. Well, that's nonsense. If somebody's committing fraud, it is to change the outcome. And if you have found election fraud, it doesn't mean you found it all. And therefore, the idea that the official results aren't affected by the fraud, that it's still a fair and honest election, is completely unsupportable. But that's the establishment media's job, to convince you the election system is fair and honest and reflects the true will of the people. And this year, it's very obvious that is not the case. Now, we're seeing this story coming out of PatriotRising.com, and there's apparently a man with a Trump sign was assaulted by a bunch of people who appear to be Bernie Sanders supporters, and I emphasize appear to be. Now, this article is talking about how the media is blaming Trump for all the violence going on at the rallies, even though we know there are professional agitators paid for in part by George Soros, directed by the Hillary Clinton campaign, and I don't think the people who just attacked that guy with the Trump sign are Bernie Sanders supporters, because remember, they played the same game in Chicago when they were disrupting Trump's rally there, and they were out there screaming, Bernie Sanders, Bernie Sanders. And the goal is to get Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders to be yelling at each other, and who does that benefit? It benefits Hillary Clinton, and they're trying to play that same game again, and we recognize it for what it is. Now, there was a petition over at the White House petition site to allow open carry of firearms at the GOP convention. And it soared past the required number of signatures, requiring a response from the White House, and the response is now coming from the Secret Service saying that the Republican National Convention will be a gun-free zone, which means that any of these paid disruptors going on in there to shoot and kill people, and blame Donald Trump for it, can rest assured that nobody's going to be able to shoot back at them. So, turning to the war zones. Actually, we got a caller waiting on the line. I don't have an ID, but let's take it. Hello, who is this, and what do you want to talk about? Okay, I guess it was just a mistake on the phone system. Turning to the war zones. Interesting little article from the Real News. Will the Syrian ceasefire end the U.S.-Russia proxy war? And former Chief of Staff for Colin Powell, Larry Wilkerson, says the ceasefire could be the key to lasting peace in Syria. I'm sorry, Mr. Wilkerson, I do not see that. The U.S. is looking for a way to justify re-invading the place, just like they are doing in Libya and Yemen. They're not going to walk away. They may sick Turkey on them right now. That may be the reason for all these warnings for Americans to get out of Turkey. Because remember, the overall agenda is to bring all of the world's oil-producing, natural resource-producing nations under the domain of the U.S. dollar. There can't be any exceptions. So they have to get Syria one way or the other. Meanwhile, of course, Vladimir Putin is congratulating Assad on the victory in Palmyra, and they're discovering that the damage to the archaeological sites is not as great as originally feared, and that they'll be able to restore and repair these archaeological sites in a mere 5 years. Now, here's a very bizarre story. This came out of telesurftv.net. Now, even as Putin is congratulating Assad and everybody's saying, all right, yes, Syria is back under Syrian control, we're seeing steam curl out of the ears of Barack Obama and David Cameron. And the U.S. State Department has come out with statements to the effect that they do not want the government of Syria to defeat or weaken ISIS. And there was a video of a State Department spokesperson, and this is going to be very confusing. Whose side are we supposed to be on? We were told that the U.S. went into Syria to get ISIS and Al-Qaeda. They kept missing ISIS and Al-Qaeda and killing the Syrians. Just like over in Iraq, they claimed to be there to kill ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and they're killing the Iraqi soldiers. Really lousy shots, American pilots, apparently. But we know what the game really is. The U.S. created, funded, supports ISIS and Al-Qaeda to cause chaos in a country so the U.S. can say, oh, my goodness, there's chaos in that country. We must go in and pacify the place by taking it over and putting in a puppet government. That's the game they have been playing all along, and we now all know it. All right, let's grab a quick phone call before the top of the hour news. John in Wisconsin, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, I'm headed up to Janesville. I'm going to go to the rally.
Good. Send us a report.
Hopefully I can meet some constituents, hand out some cards, get some web hits up. But somebody had tweeted out they thought that this was a quote-unquote punk move by Donald Trump to hold a rally right in Paul Ryan's hometown. And I really find that offensive that what we have is an uprising of common citizens that want to take back their government, and they're still characterizing us as white trash or punk or whatever it is.
Well, yeah, but that's all they can do. All they can do is call names. They can't win the argument on policy, facts, economic issues, or the war. All they can do is scream names at each other. John Kerry is right. This is an embarrassment. All right, we got to let you go. We got to take a break for news and commercials. We've got a caller waiting on the line. Please be very patient. We'll get to you as soon as the break is over. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. We've got a caller waiting. I'm going to get to you in a minute, but I wanted to comment on that story on the news break about this guy who went up in the sequoia tree for 25 hours, and he came on down, and they're saying, oh, he caused $8,000 damage to the tree. Oh, it's horrible. Well, you know, trees are living things, and whatever damage was caused is probably going to heal. And I find it very bizarre to see our political system get their knickers in a twist over $8,000 damage to a sequoia tree at the same time we're laying waste to 17 other countries with invasions and drone strikes. It does seem rather schizophrenic, if not outright psychotic. Meanwhile, the We Hate Donald Trump network, formerly known as Fox News, is trying to make a big deal over the fact that Donald Trump's campaign manager has been charged with misdemeanor battery for shoving a reporter. Now, the video that they're showing, it looks like there's a big crowd. They're rushing forward to get to where they're going. Campaign manager's trying to get through, and the reporter got shoved. And the reporter said, aha, here's a chance to make some points. And they're trying to make a mountain out of a molehill, and it's really not going to work. Because let's face it, when you're a reporter covering a hot story, you're going to get shoved by the other reporters, by the police, by whatever. And if you're not willing to accept that, find another line of work. All right, let's head into the phone lines here. Ron in New York, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, aloha, Mike. Where do you think the Ted Cruz scandal is headed now? Because it's been a total media blackout. And on Twitter, it's a big topic on Twitter. But if you go anywhere else, man, it's just a complete blackout. I'm just wondering where you think it's heading next. I'm hearing about this D.C. Madam lawyer trying to get an injunction lifted on him. Just curious what your thoughts on this.
Well, yeah. I mean, the establishment sees Donald Trump as their last desperate gasp against they see Ted Cruz as their last desperate gasp against Donald Trump, and so they're going to protect him. And this is nothing new for the corporate media. If you remember all the way back when Bill Clinton was making his first run for the White House, and CBS 60 Minutes intentionally edited their show about Jennifer Flowers to make her look stupid, discredit her, and help Bill Clinton win the nomination. And the executive producer of 60 Minutes, Don Hewitt, is on videotape admitting that that's what 60 Minutes did. And so that's what the corporate media, the establishment media, likes to do, and they're doing it again. But this is the age of the independent media, and the independent media is treating this as a big story, and it is. Because we have Ted Cruz, who's out there, and part of his persona that he's presenting to the voters is how he's a Christian and he's a moral man. And, again, the hypocrisy is stunning. And they're trying to basically put out all this false information. They're trying to trip up the independent media. And so you got to double check everything that's coming on in. But again, National Enquirer, following the Cher lawsuit, does fact check. and they were right about Edwards, they were right about Tiger Woods. They generally get these things right. Breitbart also had the story from an independent source and chose not to go with it. And we're hearing from people like Roger Stone that, yeah, as far as they know, it's for the most part true. And Roger Stone made a valid point. If this story was false, why hasn't Ted Cruz sued the National Enquirer? And the reason is very simple. In a lawsuit, the Enquirer would be allowed to place their evidence for Ted Cruz's behavior into the public record in open court. And Ted Cruz can't risk that. So the corporate media thinks they're going to keep a lid on it. They won't. I remember back during this whole run-up to the Iraq War, the corporate media was absolutely ignoring the Downing Street memo that blew the lid off the fact that the propaganda was just all in service to selling the war to the American people. And the independent media made it the hot story for a month. And after that, the corporate media was forced to cover it because everybody was calling them up and saying, why aren't you covering this memo story? And the corporate media is in the business of deception and cover-up, but they don't want it to actually become visible to their audience or people start tuning them out, which is actually already happening anyway. So the corporate media is making themselves irrelevant. They're marginalizing themselves. They're just showing themselves to be the sales pitch for various products and candidates and wars and policies and taxes. And people are coming more and more over to the independent media. The numbers at my server are going up, and I think that's probably true for everybody who's in the independent media right now. Okay?
Hey, all right. But what do you think about the D.C. Madam and the numbers? Do you think that's related to Ted Cruz?
Well, I think we have to look at the timing. The lawyer is saying that this could upend, the presidential campaign, and he's dropping a very strong hint about it. And we already know the judge is going to say, no, the injunction stays, because they're all out to protect Ted Cruz because they don't want Donald Trump. Apparently, one of the email addresses in Ted Cruz's Senate office, and let's be accurate, it's the press email address, showed up on the Ashley Madison website database. Right. So there's something going on there as well. Okay?
Do you think the media can get away with this?
No, they're not getting away with it. That's why you're here. That's why you're listening to my show instead of listening to them. They're not getting away with it.
Thank you, Mike.
All right, thank you. We're going to switch over here to John in Barbados. John, aloha. What's on your mind?
Getting back to the Brussels and French Paris terrorist attacks, I've been looking all through the various internet sites, and lots of ex-CIA and other analysts are agreeing with what I said last week, that this is looking like Operation Gladio. And they're quoting various sources, and I've been through those sources, and it really does look like the old OSS/CIA, which were the stay-behind people after the Second World War who were destabilizing, particularly the Axis countries of Italy and Germany. And it looks like this is just an extension of Operation Gladio.
Well, we don't know. We don't know if that operation itself is still ongoing. They're just using the same methods. And let's be honest, those Gladio people at the end of World War II are all retired or passed on. But it's the same techniques. When you want to go in and change a government, you have to create chaos in order to destabilize the society and get the people ready for a change. If a nation is stable and prosperous and everybody's happy, you can't go on in there and change the government. The people are just satisfied with what they've got. If you're going to change the structure of government, you have to precede that by creating as much chaos as you can so that people are saying, oh, I'm ready for a change. And that's what's going on in a lot of these places. They're not getting the change that they want. You can just ask Angela Merkel about that.
I want to turn my attention now to the Downing Street memo. During the Chilcot inquiry into the Iraq War, this information was accidentally put on the Chilcot inquiry's website. Of course, 20 minutes later, it was taken down. However, me being who I am, I went straight to Google Cache, picked it up, and republished it. You know, these people are they think we're stupid. And,
no, they hope we're stupid. They hope we're stupid, but we're not. We're very smart people out here.
I republished the email between Bush and Blair, and it was all over the place. I think it got taken down again, but, you know,
well, in the age of the Internet, once something is out there, there is no getting it back. There's no way to take it back. And there are a lot of politicians and a lot of corporate CEOs and a lot of other people who are out there saying, you know, there's got to be some way I can go out and threaten or sue people to take things down. And for the big Internet providers and websites, yeah, you can threaten Digital Millennium Copyright Act and get things taken down. But it's still going to be out there in people's personal archives.
And I'm shocked. John Kerry actually told the truth. He said the American primary election is a disgrace.
He said it was embarrassing, but he's absolutely correct. Got to let you go, John. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And one of the very alarming things we're seeing right now, the United States government has issued a travel warning for Turkey, saying U.S. citizens should not go there. But they're not the only one. Israel has issued a travel warning to its citizens going to Turkey. Russia issues a travel warning going to Turkey. The Pentagon has ordered military families out of Turkey. Canada has done the same thing. On and on and on. Extreme risk. Now, what's going on there? Because after all, the last few terror attacks were in Paris and Brussels. Why all of a sudden Turkey? Well, I have a theory. And the theory is that the U.S. government is not about to sit still for the fact that Bashar al-Assad is back in control of Syria. I think the U.S.-backed terrorist groups, ISIS and Al-Qaeda, I think Raqqa is the only place they've got left. And the Syrian army is marching on that right now. But the U.S. is not going to sit there and let a pesky conquered province, or almost conquered province, slip from their grasp. They're looking for a reason for some kind of an invasion. And they've been talking about it for months, of just going on in and just outright invading the place. Kick out Bashar al-Assad and install a puppet government. And I think maybe they're going to use Turkey, either as an excuse, as a staging area. So there's going to be some kind of a big false flag that's going to be blamed on Syria. And Erdogan's going to say, we have to invade. They burned down our Reichstag. They attacked our radio station at Gleiwitz. You know, they bombed our ships and all the rest of it. And the invasion will be on. And the U.S. will be back at war, this time with Russia. You can see the danger that we're in right now. From the point of view of the money junkies, they can't quit this agenda to conquer all the resource-rich areas of the world and bring them under the U.S. dollar. To try and force the world back to Bretton Woods, where everybody's using the dollar for global trade and banking, off of which the U.S. financial system makes a piece of the action. Because over the last half-century of playing this scam on the world, the U.S. has become very lazy. We've allowed our manufacturing to decline in quantity and quality, and nobody wants our GMO agricultural exports. Without that piece of the action of global commerce brought in by forcing everyone to use the U.S. dollar, the U.S. economy is going to collapse. And that's the real ultimate agenda behind all these wars. And Syria is key to that. The United States cannot conquer just half of the resource-rich areas of the world and shackle them to the dollar, because the rest of the world will just go to the other half that are still free to trade in whatever currencies they want to. It's an all-or-nothing deal. And the U.S. can't abandon this policy and reverse course without triggering an economic collapse. And let's be honest, many of our leaders are looking at war crimes charges if they do not carry through to ultimate victory, where they get to decide who sits on the Nuremberg courts and who will write the history books. So from their point of view, they must move forward. And they're risking war with Russia, war with China, which we cannot win in the conventional sense. And that means somewhere down the road, there are going to be nuclear weapons. And we're probably going to lose in that event anyway. Because Russia's newest generation of ICBM is maneuverable. It has a very short boost phase to keep it out of the eye of the infrared sensors on those various satellite surveillance systems. They've designed that ballistic missile specifically to evade the U.S. ballistic missile defense system. And they've succeeded. And all of these money junkies and power freaks and people like John McCain who just are listening to the voices in their head and think it's the word of the imaginary playmate in the sky. They think war is great. We're going to be victorious because we've never lost a war. Well, there was Vietnam. And it's not like the U.S. actually won World War I and World War II all by itself, although you could be forgiven for thinking that when you remember all the movies and TV shows and even what you were taught in public school. It was like it was our victory. Not exactly. Germany was already in decline when the U.S. finally got into Europe. The Russians had pretty much turned the tide. So we're in a very troubling place. We have these money junkies who are willing to risk the incineration of the surface of planet Earth, all in an argument over whose particular brand of ink and paper the world will use from now on. And of course, they've all got their luxury bunkers. You know, the ultra-rich, they're the ultimate preppers. They've got bunkers and hideouts and all the rest of that stuff. You ordinary people, you just sit up here and, you know, eat your radiation and so forth and so on. All right, getting on back to the Middle East here. According to UNICEF, the Saudi Arabian military are killing or crippling an average of 6 Yemeni children every single day since the start of the Saudi campaign to conquer the Yemeni people and teach them a lesson about not breaking away from U.S. puppet rule. And the brinksmanship is continuing because apparently the Russian defense minister's plane was over the Baltic Sea, which is technically considered international airspace, and his plane got shadowed by a bunch of NATO fighters. And they kept a distance of 2 kilometers, but they were just following along just to send a message. And that's a wrong kind of message to be sending right now. Violence is spilling from Lebanon into Syria. Everything's in chaos over in that border, that area. Now, interestingly enough, the U.S. military's command and control, actually, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Joseph Dunford, has stated that right now the United States is in too many wars. There are too many wars for the U.S. to handle. They're saying the command and control is not organized to handle this many wars on this many fronts, and they keep piling new ones on, and they can't resolve the old ones. At this stage of the game, Afghanistan was supposed to be pacified and under U.S. control. Same thing with Iraq, same thing with Libya, same thing with Yemen. They were only going to have to worry about Syria and Iran. And the U.S. is in all these quagmires, and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs are saying they can't keep up, which makes it even more risky to be considering trying to provoke a war with Russia in Syria. We'll be right back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're going to take a phone call here from Glenn in Pennsylvania. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today? Glenn, are you there?
Hello.
There you are.
I am here. I'm waiting. Yep, I've been here. All righty. Hello. You know, every time I hear you or Joel Scows and talk about like war between the major powers, it just always seems untenable to me in view of the superlative nature of the modern weapon systems. If we look back to the Falklands War and we see what happens when the modern weapons are pitted against each other, you have a conflict there that lasted only weeks and with devastating effects on both sides. It seems to me that if a major power, like say Russia, were to lob a single conventional warhead missile into some farm field on the outskirts of a major U.S. city and say, yeah, this is what we did, it would bring everything to a screeching halt. All we need is a credible threat of the ability to destroy, not even to actually create the destruction. And besides, their infrastructure is like a house of cards. I mean, it seems like they're stuck with this Fabian socialist gradualism as opposed to major power head-to-head catastrophism.
Well, first of all, a little bit of history. When the United States developed the nuclear weapon, a lot of the scientists, including Oppenheimer, said, let's just go out to the Pacific and put this bomb on a deserted island, and we'll invite the Japanese over and set it off and say, this is what we've got. And the plan was rejected out of concern that the bomb might not work properly. And the idea was they were going to drop Fat Man on Hiroshima, and if it didn't work, the Japanese wouldn't realize what the wreckage was that was around them until it was too late. So that was that idea has been floated before. Part of getting into World War III, they've tried to do it gradually because they're aware that the population of all the involved countries really, they don't want war. Ordinary people never want war. And but we're reaching the point where they're going to have to stand up and say, yes, we're actually out of war, and we've been at World War III for a while now, and you might as well just get on board with the whole deal. Russia is not going to do anything as provocative as lobbying something into a field inside the United States of America. What they might do is demonstrate their high atmospheric transatmospheric vehicle along our coastline, but still in international space. China did that not too long ago. We all saw the videos on YouTube, and now the U.S. is scrambling to play catch-up. We're going to be talking about that a little bit later in the show.
Or just repeat the scenario with the Donald Cook. If they just take a few carrier task forces and immobilize them electronically, that's going to bring things to a grinding halt. So I find, like, yes, they could bring this type of destruction, but if the effects would be so far-reaching, and then the cataclysm, the catastrophe, the disaster, the destruction would be too great to even govern after that. You'd be literally into a zombie land scenario.
Well, unfortunately, you're thinking like a normal, moral, sane human being, not like a sociopathic world leader. Because from their point of view, they're perfectly willing to kill off 90% of the human race. They think the planet's overpopulated anyway, as long as the remaining 10% becomes their loyal slaves for however long it's going to be. And let's be honest, did you see the Donald Cook incident in any way slow down U.S. aggressions?
No, but it's maybe if it were done on a grander scale. It rattled. It sent ripples through. Through the administration and the military psychologically, certainly on that ship, and the Navy at large, I'm sure.
It demoralized the crew on the ship, absolutely, and it did concern naval planners, but it has not affected the official U.S. government militaristic, try that one again, Mike, militaristic policy one tiny bit. Now, maybe something on a larger scale, like the original version of Day the Earth Stood Still, shutting everything down for 1 hour exactly, might send that kind of a message. Or it could trigger the U.S. simply saying, shoot the nukes now, we can't take a chance of waiting any longer. It's a very, very dicey situation, unfortunately. Okay?
Right. Plus, they have the brain drain of the officers that Obama got rid of that he suspected wouldn't be compliant. He got rid of a significant number of
Yes, he did. People. So did Bush. So did Bush. Yeah. And so did Clinton. And unfortunately, you're absolutely correct. The officers most likely to be effective combat leaders are the ones who are thinking most independent and outside the box, and they've been culled from our officer corps. And what they've got left are a bunch of obedient yes men, and that, too, is one of the strategic mistakes the Nazis made, which cost them the war.
Reminds me of that British officer at the end of the Pirates of the Caribbean series, the guy who froze up mentally as the ship was finally being attacked.
Yes.
It's just good business. It's nothing personal.
Yes.
And he just kind of blocked.
I love those movies. And some of those ships are still moored out here on the western end of the island. All right, listen, I'm going to let you go here. Thank you very much. Now then, remember the shooting in the D.C. Capitol, which took place in the middle of a live shooter drill? If you're wondering why you haven't seen pictures of the shooter in the establishment media, Well, it turns out, they were hoping it was going to be a white trash Republican Trump supporter gun nut. But it actually turns out the D.C. shooter was a black Democratic minimum wage liberal. And so the storyline that they wanted blew up in their face, and that's why you're not seeing that picture here. Now, again, going back to all these travel warnings being issued against Turkey by all these countries, European tourism has been hit hard by the terrorist attacks, and we're not surprised. Nobody wants to go into a war zone. Well, there are some people, type capital T's, who love to go into conflict areas and play tourists there. And a few of them are actually working for ISIS and Al-Qaeda, because it's fun. I get to go and shoot guns and do all this exciting stuff, until they meet the reality of what war is and realize it's not what they saw on their video games and movies and TVs. Now, there's a very interesting little article coming out of Zero Hedge, Lessons from Brussels, America Should Get Out of the Middle East. Now, this story is coming in from the point of view of accepting pretty much the official view of what all this terrorism and Al-Qaeda and ISIS is going on. But they're basically saying Paris and Brussels prove that ISIS is not confined to a single country. It's got a vast geographic spread, and you're going to have to change the paradigm if you're really going after ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Of course, we know Washington, D.C. isn't going after ISIS and Al-Qaeda. ISIS and Al-Qaeda work for the U.S. government. Remember, some of the emails that came out of Hillary's server confirmed that the U.S. government was smuggling Libyan weapons through that consulate in Benghazi to ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria to play that little double game. But if there is a war on terror, the U.S. government is clearly losing it, because the more they bomb other countries, the more terror we seem to be getting. Even if you accept the whole war on terror concept at face value, it is clearly a failed policy. Now, one other thing the Brussels bombing did was to cause the member nations of the European Union to strengthen their borders even more. And that is a threat to the structure of the European Union itself, at a time when the European Union is just working as hard as they can, trying to drag everybody back on in. Now, maybe the EU thought the Brussels bombing would cause all the member states of the EU to cling to Brussels and say, "Oh, more, we've got to be a single unit." But actually, it's going the other way. It's failing miserably, just like the mass refugee migration produced exactly the opposite of the intended effect. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, this story, it's an illustration of what goes wrong when you are designing your propaganda using public relations firms and advertising agencies. Story coming out of the Telegraph in Great Britain. Belgian police believe they have found the bomber's missing gloves. They found some gloves on a bus that tested positive for explosive residue. And they said they were looking for the gloves because apparently in the security camera photos of the two patsies, they're only wearing one glove on their left hands. And they're saying this is where they hid the trigger switches. That was the shark. No bomber is dumb enough to wear just one glove. One glove stopped being the fashion when Michael Jackson died. And any airport security guard who sees two guys wearing only one glove on the left hand is going to be suspicious, or should be suspicious, unless they're too busy, doing extended checks on the really bodacious babe that was right in front of them. I mean, this is just downright silly. And again, looking at the damage at the metro station and the airport, it's too big for explosives worn on the body. And I'm beginning to question this whole suicide bomber thing anyway, because he who bombs and runs away can live to bomb another day. And anybody can build a timer. And if you're really good, you can build a radio detonator, or you can get a remote-controlled model airplane and adapt that stuff. It's not that difficult to do. The story just doesn't pass the smell test. It's descended into parody. It's become a satire, a caricature of itself. All right, over in Denmark, they're starting to draw the line on some of the Muslim refugees who are trying to make Denmark more like a Muslim country. And the Danish People's Party is saying that Muslim extremists will have their citizenship revoked and be sent back to their home countries unless they assimilate and fit into the local culture. And I think they're absolutely right. I think it is very arrogant for anybody to go into somebody else's country and say, you have to make your country more like what I left behind. And I remember when I was working in Europe all those years ago, there was a certain hostility toward the arrogant American, not me, but just as a general class, who would come on in, speak English, demand that everybody speak English, and do things the way it was done in America. And I remember this very funny incident when I was in Germany, and this animator that I was working with, we took a weekend to go over to Herrenchiemsee, which was Ludwig III's island palace. It was a copy of Versailles. Very beautiful place. And while we were there, this group of people from Texas came on in and started acting like Texans. And I remember sitting there and saying, please don't tell anybody else in this room that I'm from the same country as those people. But I made an effort to learn Italian and German, and I wasn't that good. But they respected the fact that I tried, and that opened up a lot of doors. So whether it's illegal immigrants coming in from Mexico and then demanding we make all the signs Spanish, or Muslims coming into Europe and demanding this and demanding that, no. If you want to come to this country, you fit into this country, because it's still our country and our culture. And we're rather loath to give it up because it's what we grew up with. And we have as much right to the culture that we own as anybody. This leads to a story that we're seeing over in The Guardian. Why is support for Europe's mainstream political parties on the wane? And they're just moaning and crying and wringing the hands about how all the established political parties in Europe are starting to lose elections, and all these reactionary parties are starting to gain in the polls because they're opposed to the immigration and the refugees and stuff. Well, the explanation is very simple. The established political parties in Europe are on the wane for the same reason the established political parties are on the wane in the United States, because the people of Europe, like the people of the United States, have finally realized that the established political leadership are all a bunch of self-serving crooks and liars who are completely unconcerned with the lives of ordinary people of their respective countries. North Korea is issuing a warning to their people to be prepared for a famine. Apparently their agriculture has not worked very well, and they're dealing with an extended winter over there as well. We'll be getting into that in hour number 3 here. Now, the United Nations has officially recognized democratic Israel as the world's top human rights violator. And I'm sure that Netanyahu is going to be screaming at Obama to go over to the UN and slap him upside of the head and say that somebody else is the top human rights violator. Because you're not allowed to criticize Israel. Israel's above the laws of God and men. You can't do that. You can't criticize Israel. John Elton is one of the few major stars still willing to actually do concerts inside Israel. That may change, because according to Elton John's producer, the Interior Ministry of Israel is demanding Elton John sign a declaration of loyalty as a condition of Elton John's appearance in May. That's just getting out there. If I were Elton John, I'd walk at that point. I would walk at that point. Story coming out of alternate.org. The Israel lobby's dangerous agenda for the U.S. attack free speech and criminalize resistance. And that's exactly what they're doing. They want to destroy the First Amendment right to free expression. They want to criminalize criticism of Israel no matter what Israel does. That's not America. That's not the United States. It may be Israel. But that kind of curtailment of freedom of speech and expression is not welcome in the United States of America. When you look at all the people who died in the American Revolution to guarantee us freedom of speech, subsequent wars to preserve the American way of life, or at least that's what they were being told, and now we're going to be told that, well, you can talk freely about things that we approve, but you can't talk about Israel. You can't criticize Israel. You can criticize your own government, that's fine, but you can't criticize Israel. That's not free speech, that's permitted speech. And permitted speech is a hallmark of dictatorship and tyranny. And what is really alarming is how many members of the government of the United States of America are fully on board Israel's attack on the Bill of Rights. Now, as you know, Israel's attack on free speech around the world is based on this idea that anti-Semitism is on the rise and criticism of Israel is anti-Semitism, which is nonsense. That's like saying criticism of the Nazis is just German hate. But that's what they're out there saying. And not too long ago, there was this situation where a bunch of racist and anti-Semitic messages poured out of computers all over the world on a hack. They finally identified the hacker, Andrew Aumerheimer. Now, he was raised Jewish. He claims he recently converted to a Mormon, but I've never met a Mormon who was obsessed with swastikas. It's another hate crime hoax. Israel and her supporters are going on out and painting swastikas and causing damage and trying to say, see, we're the victim. That's why you have to give up your right to freedom of speech. No, we're not going to do that. We've seen this stunt before. Now, Israel's defense minister is saying that Hezbollah and not ISIS is the threat to Israel, which basically means Israel is going to try and invade Lebanon yet again. They still want that Litani River. They just got to figure out a way to make it look like it's Lebanon's fault. By way of deception, thou shalt do war. You know that the Israeli army has the 11th most powerful military in the world, according to the international defense site Global Firepower, and you should be proud because you paid for most of it. So what do they need any more from us if they're the 11th most powerful military in the world? Well, because they can't risk their precious children in actual war. That's what you Americans are for. Got to take a break for news and commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. Let's grab a couple of phone calls here. James in Ohio. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
Hi. As far as honesty, I may have to start a write-in campaign in the presidential election for Tay tweets. I'm sure that Google's AI program isn't controlled by anybody. I think that worked out even better than Apple Maps. But I'd like your speculation about Roger Stone. I mean, saying he quit over the Megyn Kelly debacle, that just doesn't seem to ring true to me.
Well, we don't know what was going on inside. Stone may have been told that either he resigns or he's going to be fired, and if he's fired, he would lose a lot of, severance benefits. So we don't know what's going on, but there does seem to be a lot of focus on Megyn Kelly. I mean, she's definitely the attack dog in chief against Donald Trump, and they picked her, I think, at least in part because she's a woman and she could play up that whole thing about Donald Trump hostile to women. And I remember that first GOP debate, the first question out of her mouth was to Donald Trump about his attitude toward women, and he turned it around with that joke about Rosie O'Donnell, and the audience laughed, and I remember the look on Megyn Kelly's face. You could just see the steam pouring out of her nostrils and her ears. How dare you not roll over and die the way you were supposed to, you male scum, you. And
yeah, I think it's like he told Wolf Blitzer that if she didn't focus on him every night, her ratings would be even lower than his.
Yeah, could very well be. I don't know what her ratings are. I mean, I certainly don't pay much attention to her other than what comes secondhand through the independent media.
Yeah. All right, that's all I got for you.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch to Mateus in Canada. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael. Just three quick random things. The crucified priest.
Yes.
Has there been any pictures of this?
As far as I know, it didn't actually happen.
Oh, I hope not.
Well, I hope not too. I mean, crucifixion is intentionally the most painful way, to be executed, and that's why Rome basically used crucifixion to punish treason against the emperor. And contrary to the story that you got in the Bible, ordinary robbers and thieves weren't crucified. The crucifixion was reserved to enemies of the state.
Oh, okay. So this is probably just like, if you had to gamble, it might be Israel trying to stir up race hatred between Christians and Muslims. Hopefully.
Look at Rita Katz. I mean, she's all over Twitter screaming about the bad, evil Muslims, and we've all got to unite together. And there's definitely a propaganda campaign that is trying to basically pit Christians against Muslims in a new holy crusade of some kind.
Right. The Washington Post was writing an article about it. It could have been satire. It was saying that a religious organization response was that we need to have a concerted effort of prayer and 3 Hail Marys. It's like, I thought it was almost a joke. But anyways, the next thing was Bush Jr. Remember, he was smart before he was the president, and then he got dumb?
I don't know. Maybe there's a lot of lead pipes still in Washington, D.C.
But there's a lot of videos of him actually having very intelligent-sounding conversations and interviews before he's president. And have you ever had that where you get an idea and you don't have proof, but you just feel like it's right?
Well, we know
convinced that they did something.
We know that all politicians manufacture a persona to present to the public. And George W. Bush's down-home, folksy kind of Texas guy, that was his contrived persona. And it reaches the point where a lot of politicians, they'll talk about themselves in the third person because they're talking about the artificial one that is presented to the public. Richard Nixon did that all the time. Nixon wouldn't do this. Nixon wouldn't do that. Bob Dole did it all the time. And it's just a reminder that what you are seeing up on the podium or on the TV screen is not the real person. They are consummate actors and performers, and they are playing the role that they think will get them the most votes. Except for Donald Trump. I think he's coming across as pretty real.
Right. Do you think the handlers would be evil enough to sneak something into their food or something to literally chemically brain damage the president so he's more controllable?
I have no idea. There's a story we're going to be covering later in the show, a flashback to where the Pentagon is trying to develop chemicals to be administered through vaccines that will change human behavior. So who knows what's going on? But then if you look at Washington, D.C. and all the parties and all the alcohol that's flowing around, maybe they're just burning out the brain cells that way.
Right. And it's the last thing about North Korea. I'm a peace person. I was raised in peace. I completely wouldn't, I'm a nonviolent person. In this one exception, does it almost seem like it might be a humanitarian overall net benefit if North Korea was in fact taken out?
No, because the U.S. is using North Korea as a backdoor to starting a war with China, just the way they're trying to use Syria as a backdoor to war with Russia.
But North Korea is just so dumb that they don't get it?
Well, their leadership is. I mean,
that's what I mean. Yeah, okay.
Kim Jong-un he's a hothead. He's inexperienced. He basically inherited the job from his father, and he's doing as lousy a job as George W. Bush did when he inherited the job from George H.W. Bush.
Yeah,
there's a good reason the world moved away from hereditary rulers. Because, King number 1 may have done a good job, or at least he was effective, but Kings number 2 and 3 and 4 and 5, were basically dolts who had to be propped up by the palace structure.
But don't you pity all the people that are stuck in this tyranny in North Korea?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. There was a loud noise on the line. One more time.
Don't you pity all the people that are born into that tyranny in North Korea? They have no hope, it seems.
Well, my pity is reserved for the people in the United States of America who are being born into hopeless economic slavery right now. And like Donald Trump, my focus is America first, and the rest of the world's going to have to take care of itself.
Thanks a lot, Michael.
All right, thanks a lot. We're going to switch over here. Frank in England, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. It's just something cross. I was listening to a show the other night on Rinse.com. The guest, I can't remember the guest's name, but he came up with some interesting statistics, and I've quite frankly, I don't agree with him. He said that 30% or even more of Muslims in America supports ISIS, and in Europe, all Muslims are hiding these jihadists, although they may not agree with them, but they're hiding them, they're feeding them, they're clothing them. And I'm not a religious man by any stretch of the imagination, but my partner is Muslim, and they don't think I have so many. I have grandchildren who are Muslims. I have all sorts of people, and they despise these people, and they don't protect them in any shape or form.
That's been my experience as well.
Come from.
You know, I mean, let's face it. Every time they put out one of these terrorists there and say, oh, it's an evil Muslim terrorist. I mean, look at the guy that they killed in Abbottabad that they tried to tell us was Osama bin Laden, and he had a porn collection and a bunch of other stuff like that, which tells us he's not a devout Muslim. And, again, it's part of the propaganda. And I wish Jeff Rense would be a little bit more careful. I don't buy those statistics and those claims. And it's certainly not the experience with the Muslims that I've met either. We're talking about a very tiny group of people who are committing these acts of terror for political gain, and part of the political gain is to turn Christians against Muslims. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, earlier in the program, I was looking at all these countries that are issuing travel warnings for their people to stay out of Turkey. It's not just the United States. It's France. It's Russia. It's Israel. It's all over the place. They're telegraphing something big is going to happen in Turkey, probably to justify Turkey declaring war on Syria, and will be off and running because the U.S. is not going to walk away from Syria. And now the We Hate Donald Trump network, formerly Fox News, was running a banner story where apparently Erdogan is coming to Washington, D.C. to attend an emergency nuclear summit convened by President Obama. So something is in play. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call. Matt in Colorado, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, aloha, Michael. How's it going?
It's going fine.
Yeah, so I wanted to, first off, I think that both of the Democratic and Republican parties are two wings of the same bird with their own oligarchy interest, and you talked about hereditary rulers previously in other countries, but however, we have the Bushes and Clintons that are clearly hereditary rulers.
I was making a reference to them, actually.
Okay, and so what I would like to say in addition to that is that I think everything that I've heard from a logical perspective of Bernie Sanders has been quite legitimate, and the drums of war are being beaten. And yes. One of the things that I wanted to look at from a specific, tight economic perspective, and I know you've had criticized the shitty-ass new jet.
I have to watch your language on this here radio, please.
Okay. The poorly designed F-35 that will cost the American taxpayers $1.3 trillion over the next, 10 years or whatever it is. And so I just did some simple math, and people are always criticizing Bernie Sanders for saying, no, we can't give college students free education. But if you actually just do the math of $1.3 trillion and then look at the number of college-age citizens in the United States between 18 and 24 years old, that would equal approximately $43,333 per eligible student. And I think that the existing high school education, which used to be good to go maybe 50 years ago, is not even competitive whatsoever. And on this day and age, a basic college education is required for us to be competitive in the global marketplace in order to strengthen America in much better ways as opposed to killing foreigners that have never directly threatened us.
Well, the education system serves the state, and the whole point of the education system over the last going on 20 years was to raise a generation of young Americans who can't think critically and analytically, but will simply believe what they're told to believe and obey orders, follow instructions. That's it. And that's how you build an army that will march into battle without question. Military spending is obscene. We don't really know how much of it there is going on because there's the official Pentagon budget and then there's the so-called black budget that's hidden, buried in all kinds of other government agencies to fund all kinds of secret things that are going on here. Look at that $3 trillion that vanished from the Pentagon just before 9/11 and figure how much...
Donald. No, I know. They're doing a secret space program, or they're reallocating that for black ops.
No. You're missing my point. I'm saying think of how much good that $3 trillion could have done for our infrastructure, education, health, and the American people. I look how much is being poured into all these weapons. When Obama went to handle the Flint emergency, he budgeted only $5 million to deal with the crisis in Flint. That works out to $50 per person who's been drinking this toxic, dangerous water, and they're going to cut that off now. But when it comes to the weapons, trillions and trillions.
I agree with majority of the stuff that you says, or that you say, Michael. And this is why I am. This is the primary call. I just wanted to preface it with that little bit of economic data, and I'd like to get your opinion on why Bernie Sanders is not the most electable and best candidate for our future as Americans, and to strengthen not only our economy but also stabilize the global instability that is threatening World War II.
Well, I certainly prefer Bernie Sanders over Hillary Clinton, and I prefer Trump because he's going to shake up a system that's badly in need of being shaken up. But I would be okay if Bernie Sanders were to win in November. I don't have a serious problem with that at all.
Well, if you had to take one of the two in the debate between Trump or Sanders,
I'm going to have to listen to the debate and see what they're actually saying and whether their plans can actually work. Which means getting on out with the spreadsheet. I'm hearing a lot of criticism that Sanders' proposed tax and economic plan doesn't actually pencil out. So we'd have to take a close look at the numbers. Anyway, listen, I need to let you go because we're running out of time, and I got a bunch of stuff that I need to get to. Story coming out of Sputnik News. The director of the National Security Agency, Admiral Michael Rogers, has met with Israeli security officials to forge closer ties between U.S. and Israeli cyber intelligence gathering, and they're talking about planning Stuxnet-like operations. They may be telegraphing the virtual 9/11 that we have been warning about. Just shut everything down, blame it on Russia, China, whatever. Great Britain is very angry because the United Nations has declared that, in point of fact, the Falkland Islands do fall within Argentina's territorial waters. And Britain is out there saying, well, it's not legally binding. We don't have to listen to the United Nations. We're Great Britain. So forth and so on. Isn't it kind of funny how all these world leaders, they're always talk about human rights and international law until it gets in their way. And then it's, the heck with that stuff. Anyway. Speaking of bovine excrement being shoveled on out, there's an article over at shtfplan.com that is taking Reuters to task for a story Reuters put out, and this is the headline, I'm not kidding you. There is no sign of recession. Strong consumer spending underscores the economy's underlying strength. Now, this is obviously a piece of propaganda to get you to say, hey, we don't need to vote out the incumbents. Things are really good, at least according to Reuters. And we're going to see this message come out between now and November. The economy's doing fine. Look at the stock market. And if you've lost your job and your business and your home, it's all your own fault. And you shouldn't use that to decide, how you're going to vote. Because the political campaigns all understand Americans do tend to vote with their wallets first and foremost. And that's not a bad model to go with. Voting for the candidate or the policy that is going to make your life better, that's just common sense here. Now, the reality is a little bit different. The first quarter GDP numbers have been revised downward. Have you ever noticed how the government will come out and say, we had a fabulous quarter, everything's great, and then 3 months down the road, well, we've had to revise the figures downward here, but we're having a great quarter this time. And then 3 months from now, oh, well, it wasn't so good, but we're having a great quarter this time. See how the game is played? We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And before we get back to the economy here, I have to talk about this report coming out of Sky News that is claiming that intelligence officials, who remain anonymous and unnamed, are insisting that they are aware of a plan by ISIS to attack Jewish children in Turkey, which would then be the pretext for both Israel and Turkey to declare war on Syria, except for the little wrinkle that ISIS is pretty much erased from Syria at this point. But that's what's coming. They're trying to gin up a war in Syria. It's amazing here. All righty, getting back to the economy. Standard & Poor's is getting gloomy. There's a spike in defaults in corporations. And we're seeing this article out of the Economic Collapse blog. Corporate debt defaults explode to catastrophic levels not seen since the last financial crisis. And if you have seen that movie, The Big Short, you will recall that everybody was trying to ignore the defaults and say, everything's fine, everything's fine, everything's fine, until the defaults just exploded. Now, as you know, a so-called reputable banker on Wall Street just got arrested for major fraud, and it's making the people on Wall Street nervous because the entire banking financial system has crafted an illusion of being trustworthy. You can trust them with your money. They will take care of you. And then we find out from stories like Wolf of Wall Street that, no, they're taking care of themselves. And ordinary people get slammed by it. Fitch has just lowered Chicago's credit rating to just one step above junk. They're in trouble. And according to the Congressional Budget Office, Obamacare has missed its enrollment goal by 24 million people. People can't afford the sky-high premiums. They realize that with the sky-high deductibles, they're not going to get any benefit from the insurance. They're just going to pay the IRS penalty for not doing as they're told to do by the federal government. Story coming out of Bloomberg. Newspapers gobble each other up to survive the digital apocalypse. And they're talking about all the big newspapers that are buying up the small newspapers and trying to cut their staff, trying to stay in business. And oh, woe is us, the newspapers and the corporate media are in serious trouble. Well, it's simple. Nobody likes a liar. If the corporate media had been telling the American people the truth about what the government was doing all along, which is why that First Amendment is there, to give them that ability, the independent media would have never gained a readership. It wouldn't have even started. If the corporate media had gone on out and said there's compelling evidence that Vince Foster was murdered, I wouldn't have started my blog. I had better things to do. If the American corporate media had been telling the American people the truth all along, they'd still be doing a healthy business. They did this to themselves, and I have no sympathy for them. Now, the FBI, with an Israeli company's help, reports they've unlocked the terrorist's phone, and they've dropped their case against Apple. That was wise for them to do. It was turning into a public relations nightmare. And remember, the iPhone in question did not actually belong to one of the patsies. It was a work-issued phone. And in all probability, there wasn't anything on there to be found. So they're just withdrawing with dignity and saying, we got what we want, which may be completely useless, but it was a PR disaster. Glenn Greenwald is out with a new article. The U.S. government wants ability to access the communications of everyone, everywhere. And so far, they have yet to stop a terror attack ahead of time or catch all these people who are stealing our data, hacking our systems. They can't even track down the people who are violating the do not call telemarketer list. Remember, we actually had somebody come on out and say this grabbing of all communications has made the problem unmanageable. Instead of watching known suspects, they're trying to watch everybody, and the volume of data is just overwhelming. Now, here's a story for those who've been around my site for a very, very long time. Lockheed Martin has tacitly acknowledged that the Aurora program was a reality. Now, Lockheed is out there. They're pushing for funding to develop what they're calling the SR-72. And this is going to be a hypersonic aircraft that flies at the very top of the atmosphere. And they're saying it's based on technology they have been developing over the last couple of decades. Now, if you lived in Southern California, you probably remember a time that we went through an experience called the Aurora quakes. And it was a sonic boom. It wasn't really an earthquake, but seismology students at colleges all up and down the Southern California coast and inside were recording these sonic booms with very accurate timekeeping, and they were able to deduce the booms were caused by a very rapidly descending vehicle heading into Edwards Air Force Base. Now, the Aurora quakes went away, so the development of this vehicle probably went someplace else. But this is basically an admission that, yes, there was an Aurora program, and Lockheed is trying to revive it and get the funding to turn it into the SR-72. Shootings are up 80% in Chicago this year. Chicago's gun control working absolutely wonderfully. Chicago is held up as the model for gun control for the rest of America. Meanwhile, another story over in government slaves. In neighborhoods where gun sales are going up, crime has gone down because the criminals know they are dealing with an armed populace. So compare and contrast those two stories. Here's a very good story. This is from Oraz.com. There's this gun store owner, had a guy in there buying a gun, who passed the background check. This was reported on CNN. But the customer made an off-the-cuff remark about a shooting at Ohio University, and so the gun store owner, even though the customer passed the background check, said, I am not selling you a gun. And it's important to focus on these stories to remind everybody that gun store owners and gun users, gun owners, are very responsible people. They're not the gun nuts running around firing into the air that the gun grabbers try and portray us. Over in Harrisburg, Virginia, police are refusing to release an existing body cam footage of a fatal shooting. They're refusing a third-party investigation. They're calling it department preference. We don't need to show you the tape. We don't need an outside investigation. You know, trust us, it's been transparent. No, it isn't. Okay, let me skip on down to some of these things because we're running out of time here. Very alarming story that came out of the New Yorker. There is now a program, a training program set up by Joseph Buckley, the president of Johnny Reed and Associates, based in Chicago. And it is teaching teachers on methods of how to interrogate students. Why is that even needed in a school environment? If I were a parent of a child in public school and I found out the teachers were being trained in interrogation techniques, I'd move my kid to a private school. So let's talk a little bit about human-caused global warming. Storm Katie brings in unexpected snow to the region. Started on Easter. There's a couple of major systems, one in the west, one in the east. Winter Storm Troy spreading snow from Rockies to the northern plains and upper Midwest. Blizzard conditions possible. Heavy snow and severe weather as storm moves into the plains, and cattle ranchers are in a panic because we're supposed to be into spring. The cattle are calving, and the calves are not going to be able to survive this cold snap. They could freeze to death. Gosh darn that, human-caused global warming. And apparently they're forecasting Arctic air and snow in the northeastern U.S. in the first week of April. We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. And, of course, following on all the reports of snow and ice and possible loss to the beef industry from all this unseasonably cold weather, this is the end of March. March is supposed to come in like a lion but go out like a lamb, and April's supposed to be beautiful, and they're forecasting snow into the first week of April. But Attorney General Loretta Lynch is getting ready to prosecute anybody who denies human-caused global warming is real. But she doesn't think that Hillary Clinton's possible espionage is really worth doing anything about. As it turns out, Loretta Lynch's law firm is tied to the Clintons. And apparently Lynch was given an appointment by Bill Clinton. We've got the story on the front page of WhatReallyHappened.com. You need to look at it. It's just one big incestuous bunch of people working for each other and taking care of each other. Loretta Lynch was a litigation partner for 8 years at a major Washington law firm that served the Clintons. So let's get on to the vaccine situation. There's a lot of turmoil going on now over Robert De Niro's yanking of the vaccine documentary from the Tribeca Film Festival, and whether or not it's going to be seeing any distribution anywhere at all. And everybody's trying to find out what's going on. There's an article that's over in truthkings.com talking about the financial links. Now, Robert De Niro co-founded the Tribeca Film Festival back, I think it was 2002. But it receives corporate funding. All film festivals do. I was involved in the Hawaii International Film Festival. In fact, I did an animation for the festival that involved a bunch of fish swimming in the waters off of the ocean, and all the fish had the corporate logos of all the sponsors. And they get to sign the checks, and they have a tremendous amount of influence, and that appears to be what happened at the Tribeca Film Festival. So we've got this former science chief, Dr. Peter Fletcher. He used to be the chief scientific officer at the Department of Health. And he says out there, the MMR fears are coming true. And if it is proven that the jab is causing autism, the refusal by governments to properly evaluate the risks will make this one of the greatest scandals in medical history. And he's absolutely right. Because we know that the CDC report that claimed to prove there was no link was a fraud. One of the authors of that study blew the whistle. The data was cherry-picked to come to a preordained result. The data that showed a link between the vaccine and autism was destroyed. Now, John Rappaport has an article out there, Medical Truth Canceled Due to Hollywood Medical Mind Control in the Film Industry. And like myself, he's got past exposure connection to the film industry. And he was saying he knew a lot of people in and around the movie industry, and people who become stars are approached and courted by industry representatives to encourage them not to agree to star in certain screenplays. A lot of them get paid a lot of money to do commercials for Big Pharma. And you can actually make more money off of a good commercial with national play than you can being an actor in a regular feature film. Most people don't understand. The commercials are where the major money is. Commercials have the highest dollar per second of runtime budget. In the early days of computer animation, it was only commercials could afford our work. TV shows and feature films didn't have that kind of money, but the commercials always did. Commercials really are the best thing on television. A 30-second commercial will often have a budget that is bigger than the 30-minute sitcom that wraps around it. And that kind of money brings with it a lot of influence. Now, Dr. Wakefield is out there, and we've got a video of him giving a presentation about vaccines and the links to autism with clinical evidence and victims. This is a scandal. We have a government that is so in love with corporate money that they are perfectly okay with these corporations selling you dangerous products, dangerous medicines, dangerous food, toxic tap water? Now, as I mentioned earlier in the show, we reprised a video of a presentation at the Pentagon where they're talking about using vaccines to alter human behavior. Get your flu vaccine this year, and all of a sudden you will love the government. You won't even feel like you want to ask questions about what you're seeing on TV. You'll believe the used car salesman, and so forth. Story out of Investment Watch blog. As it turns out, apparently the FDA has never formally approved GMO foods. It's just sort of, yeah, they're there. We're not going to get involved. They've never really been tested or evaluated outside of that French test, that French research. And by the way, that's now being replicated at labs around the world, but nowhere in the United States of America. I love this story. This is a good one. There's this United Airlines pilot. And apparently when he wasn't piloting, he was running a network of brothels in Houston, Texas. And they finally caught him, and he's looking at 20 years behind bars. And he had a whole bunch of girls working in these brothels, and he was just raking in the dough. It sort of brings new meaning to the expression, fly the friendly skies. And yes, he was a pilot for United. Actually, Fly United now takes on a whole new meaning as well. Speaking of airlines, you remember that Fly Dubai plane that crashed and everybody was saying, oh, it was this, it was that. Apparently, all of the black boxes of that aircraft have been decoded, and there is no indication of an onboard system malfunction found. This was Fly Dubai flight FZ980, which crashed in Rostov-on-Don, Russia. It was fully operational when it took off from the airport, and there was nothing on the recorders indicating malfunction, so they're looking at possible terror attack, which wouldn't surprise me because the video showing the crash of that plane, you know, it was coming in at a very, very steep angle. Yesterday we were talking about this fire that engulfed 2 towers of a residential skyscraper in the United Arab Emirates. And we put up the video, and we were joking about any second it's going to collapse into its footprint, just like building number 7 at the World Trade Center. Any second it's going to do that. The fire is pretty much out. The frames of the skyscrapers are still standing. They did not collapse into their own footprint. But we reprised the video to WhatReallyHappened.com because you got to read the comments. Because everybody was in there saying exactly the same thing. Oh, my goodness, we should have protected it with, you know, with Syrian passport paper and more and more. So everybody understands now what 9/11 really was. They're seeing the patterns. Now, apparently the U.S. government has now ordered more than 50 reports on problems or deficiencies in different government departments and agencies to be withheld from public access. This is from the Government Accountability Office, which apparently is no longer providing accountability for the government, because they produced all these reports about all the problems in the various departments and agencies, but you're not allowed to see them. Total surveillance on you, but the government is building up a wall. It's none of your business what we're doing in here. None of your business at all. All right, there's the music. Time for me to get on out of here and get something useful done with the rest of the day. We'll be back tomorrow, Wednesday, Hump Day, here on the Genesis Communication Network. And until then, I want to send a thanks to everybody who's been donating to WhatReallyHappened.com because it's really helping at a time when we need the help. So thanks to all of you, and we'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.